Hi guys, so this is your second lecture, Chapter 1, Key Issue 2. So you should kind of know the drill by now. You should have your notes ready to go and ready to add to them. You should have already done your reading for Chapter 1, Key Issue 2. And now you should be ready to add to the notes that I've already given you. Today we're mostly focusing on site versus situation and then also regions and regionalism. Most of this is going to be a review of what you've already done in the book. I'm just kind of giving you more explanation this time. Okay, so when we talk about identifying a place, we look at two things primarily, site and situation. Place names are another way to identify a place, which is called toponymy, which is in your book. We're not going to talk about it here because it's pretty straightforward. But we're mostly going to focus on site and situation, and then in class we're going to do some practice with these terms as well by doing some field work, which is another important tool of geographers. So first off, site is the physical character of a place. So if you remember from the last lecture, we talked about physical maps. Physical maps have to do with naturally occurring features. But when we talk about a site, we can also talk about non-natural features, which I'll kind of show you in a second. But some examples of things you might talk about when you're talking about site is climate, water sources, topography, soil, vegetation, latitude, elevation. So those sorts of things. So example, like if I was talking about the site of this specific location, I would say there are mountains in the horizon. There's a field of beautiful purple flowers, right? We're describing the things that we can see, so we are describing the site. This is a picture of Millennium Park in Chicago. So I would say the site is we have this art piece called Cloudgate, or also known as the Bean. That's what they call it in Chicago. And we have the Chicago skyline, right? So we're talking about this site. Situation is different. Situation is when we talk about directional descriptions, a place in relation to another place, okay? So if we said like Singapore is important because it's near a bunch of shipping passages, that would be a situational description, okay? So, let me go back actually. So if we just talked about this picture again, if I said Cloudgate is in Millennium Park is on Michigan Avenue, Michigan Avenue is near Lake Michigan, those are all situational descriptions. So when you're describing what a place looks like, you're talking about site. When you're talking about what it feels like, if we were talking about the climate, that would be site. If we were talking about the average rainfall a place gets, that is also site. Situational is pretty strictly where that place is in relation to other places. So hopefully that's pretty clear. We're going to work on this in class as well. Okay. So now we're going to talk about regions. Region types are things you do need to memorize. You often get questions on the test that ask you for an example of a formal region, or they'll describe a region for you and you have to classify what type of region that is. So you should be prepared to do that. So the definition of a region is just an area that has some sort of distinctive characteristic. And that distinctive characteristic can be lots of different things. And once you determine that distinctive characteristic, that tells you what type of region it is. Regions oftentimes don't have borders. Some do. Sometimes they can have very vague borders, so it could be hard to kind of decipher what is and is not included in that region. If that doesn't make sense, let me go into a little bit more detail here. Here's a map of the U.S. These are all different regions of the U.S., okay? Okay, so the first one is formal regions. Sometimes you will see these called uniform regions, so I would just know that formal and uniform are the same thing, or sometimes they're called a homogeneous region, which I know is a vocab word for you in Miss Gill's class, so you should know what that means. So we're looking for something that's the same, okay? So everyone within a formal region has a distinctive characteristic. And so a good example would be something like Washoe County, right? Everyone who lives in Washoe County has something in common by being all residents of Washoe County, okay? So that would be an example of a formal region. Another would be a congressional district or a voting district, right? So let's see, we have a border here for District 7. So everybody within District 7 has the same congressman, okay? So formal regions, unlike a lot of other region types that we'll go over, they do have specific borders, okay? Like people in number 3 here do not have the same congressman as people in number 7, okay? That's a distinct border, a defined border, which makes formal regions different than other types of regions. Okay, here's another example. This is the Holy Roman Empire as it looked in 1116. So we have these pink areas, right? These kind of reddish pink areas. Even though they are different countries, they were all under the Catholic Church. So they all had that in common. So that's the Holy Roman Empire, okay? So even though they're different countries, because they have that thing in common, together they are a region. And because empires typically have very distinct borders, this would also count as a formal region. Okay, a functional region is different. A functional region is sometimes called a nodal region, so you should know both of those terms. It's the same thing, functional or nodal. So think of it this way, like a TV station range is a good example of a functional region. So they all are revolving around something. They're all kind of interconnected by something. So like right here, I have the New York City subway diagram, okay? So every location within this map is part of a functional region because they're all connected to the subway system, right? Let's see what else I got here. Okay, so these are police districts in the city of Chicago. So within this border here, this police department serves everything within this, okay? So that is a functional region, okay? So functional regions often have defined borders as well. Okay, and then a vernacular region, also known as a perceptual region. These are kind of difficult to define because they're very vague, okay? So it's more like what people have in common within that region is some sort of cultural identity, okay? So this is kind of a funny thing I found, but this is like the perceptions of what we think people in Reno do. Sorry, Sun Valley. And then let's see, upper middle class white folk in like that looks like Vista area of Sparks. I thought that was kind of funny. Another good example would be the Midwest, right? So these are the states of the Midwest. There isn't like a border around the Midwest that says you're in the Midwest now. What states in the Midwest have in common is their culture. So they're a very agriculturally based economy, right? Lots of farming. In the Midwest, they have a distinct accent that kind of sets them apart and a distinct lifestyle that sets them apart. That's going to be different than the southern United States or the eastern United States, okay? So a vernacular or a perceptual region has more to do with cultural traits. So it's not formal in that way, and it doesn't necessarily have a border, or sometimes the border is fuzzy, right? Like you could be living outside of North Dakota, but kind of near it, but still identify as a Midwesterner because you share that culture. Okay, and then for Canada, there is this eastern part of Canada is sometimes called French Canada because a lot of them speak French. They embrace a very French culture. They eat French food. They look to France for a lot of cultural guidance. So again, there's not like a border on this map showing you that this is French Canada. it's unofficial, right? It's a perceptual region that these people in this area of Canada tend to be more French. Okay, so when we're talking about regions, we look a lot at regionalism, which is when you know something about a region and you use it to make some statements about the culture, okay? So like if we know something about the Middle East, let's say we don't know a lot specifically about the country of Pakistan, but we know it's in the Middle East, so we can make some assumptions, right? We can say, well, they're most likely Muslim. It could be that they're in a war right now because we know the Arab Spring, and in Afghanistan and in lots of places in the Middle East they are dealing with ISIS, so we might be able to assume that that is something that Pakistan is dealing with as well. So it's what you do to kind of get some meaning from a particular place based on the region that it's within. Okay, so you use regions as a form of study, and it helps give you information. That's regionalism. You also might identify with your region, and that can also be regionalism. Like if I am a Southerner, I might be proud of my Southernness. I might have Confederate flags raised at my house. I might eat a diet that's full of grits and yummy Southern food, right? So the other thing is when you identify with the region that you live in, that can also be regionalism. So here's an example, right? So we have the East Coast of the United States and we have the West Coast. And there are things that kind of go with those regions, and that understanding is regionalism, right? Like, so we tend to be more casual on the West Coast than on the East Coast. We kind of enjoy life more, whereas the East Coast works a little more. We do a lot of biking. There's lots of subways and taxis and public transit in the East Coast. We drive more on the West Coast. What else do we have here? Acoustic guitar versus a briefcase, right? Food, fish versus pizza, although I think we like pizza here on the West Coast too. So that just kind of gives you an idea, right? This identification that the West Coast is like this, the East Coast is like that, that's regionalism. Okay, and what's underlying in a lot of these things that we've talked about today is culture. And culture consists of two things: what people care about and what people take care of, okay? And that can include lots of different things: language, clothing, art, marriage practices, religion. Let me show you some examples. So something that you might care about in your culture is your house, and it could be something that you also take care of. So this is a house in the United States on the left. This is a house in Singapore on the right. So what's unifying between these two things is a home is a space that pretty much in any culture you find, it's going to be something that people care about and take care of. But it might differ from culture to culture. And then this is a classroom in the United States on the left and a Chinese classroom on the right. So again, education is something that countries take care of and something that they care about, but they can look different from place to place. Okay, and why do we care about culture as geographers? Because if we know something about the culture, it tells us something about how that culture uses space and how the space or place affects the culture, so vice versa. So here's an example. So Christianity is a big part of some people's culture, so the way they alter the landscape is by building a church on it, right? Or most cultures in the world need energy to survive, right? They need some sort of electric power or something to make whatever it is that they do run. So you can use the environment to help you do that, something like a windmill, but then you are also altering that landscape because of the need of that culture, right? So it kind of works two different ways. Okay, so that's it for today. So bring in questions if something is confusing to you still. We are going to go over regions in class. We are going to go over site and situation. You're going to be solid on these, but if you're still kind of fuzzy, then feel free to bring that up in class because you're probably not the only one. And as always, you never know when it's going to be gonna happen. Be ready for a pop quiz. Okay, so see you later for key issue 3.